On a cold spring morning in the year 1218, the fate of one of the richest empires on earth quietly sealed itself on the dusty roads of Central Asia. The date was not marked by banners or trumpets, but by blood and arrogance. In the city of Otrar, a key trading hub of the Khwarezmian Empire, Mongol merchants sent by Genghis Khan were seized, accused of espionage, and executed. Their goods were confiscated. Their bodies were discarded. When news of the massacre reached the Mongol steppe, it carried with it a message far more dangerous than any insult. An empire had chosen to humiliate a man who had never forgotten a slight and never forgiven one. At that moment, the Khwarezmian Empire stood at the height of its power. Stretching from the Caspian Sea in the west to the borders of India in the east, it controlled vast trade routes, fertile river valleys, and some of the most sophisticated cities in the Islamic world. Its markets overflowed with silk, spices, silver, and slaves. Its scholars filled libraries with philosophy, astronomy, and law. Its armies numbered in the hundreds of thousands. To its rulers, the nomads of the eastern steppe appeared backward, disorganized, and irrelevant. Genghis Khan, in their eyes, was little more than a tribal chieftain playing at empire. This fatal misjudgment would erase Khwarezm from history. To understand how such a powerful state could vanish so completely, one must first understand what Khwarezm was, and why its leaders believed themselves untouchable. The Khwarezmian Empire had risen rapidly in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, born from the collapse of Seljuk authority. Its ruler in 1218, Ala ad-Din Muhammad Roman II, styled himself Shah of Khwarezm and Sultan of vast dominions. He ruled over a multi-ethnic population of Persians, Turks, Arabs, and Central Asian peoples, governed through a complex bureaucracy inherited from earlier Islamic empires. Muhammad Roman II was ambitious, intelligent, and deeply insecure. He had expanded his realm through conquest and intrigue, defeating rival dynasties and absorbing their lands. But his authority was fragile. He distrusted his generals, feared rebellion in his provinces, and shared power uneasily with his formidable mother, Turken Khotun, who controlled court politics and key appointments. The empire looked strong from the outside, but inside it was fractured by rivalries, corruption, and fear. Across the eastern horizon, another power was rising with terrifying speed. By 1218, Genghis Khan had already unified the Mongol tribes, destroyed rival steppe confederations, and crushed the Jin dynasty in northern China. His armies were not large by conventional standards, but they were disciplined, mobile, and commanded by leaders chosen for loyalty and ability rather than noble birth. Genghis ruled not through luxury, but through law, personal authority, and shared plunder. His empire was still young, but it was expanding like a wildfire. Contrary to later myth, Genghis Khan did not initially seek war with Khwarezm. His priorities lay to the east, consolidating power in China and securing trade. The Silk Road was vital to Mongol prosperity, and Khwarezm controlled its western arteries. Genghis therefore sent a diplomatic mission to Shah Muhammad Roman II, offering peace, trade, and mutual recognition. According to Persian chroniclers, the Mongol envoys carried a message that addressed Muhammad as a fellow sovereign, proposing friendship between their realms. The Shah was suspicious, but not yet hostile. Trade caravans were allowed to enter Khwarezmian territory. Then came the incident at Otrar. Otrar was governed by Inalchuq, a relative of the Shah and a man notorious for his greed and brutality. When a Mongol caravan arrived in the city, Inalchuq accused its members of spying. Despite their protests and diplomatic credentials, he had them arrested. Their goods were seized. After seeking approval from the Shah, or perhaps acting with the confidence that he would not be punished, Inalchuq ordered the merchants executed. When Genghis Khan learned of this, he responded with restraint that few would have expected. He sent a second embassy to Shah Muhammad Roman II, demanding justice, The Khan asked for Inalchuq to be handed over for punishment and for compensation to be paid to the families of the murdered merchants. This was not an unreasonable demand by the standards of medieval diplomacy. It was, in fact, an attempt to avoid war. The Shah responded with catastrophic arrogance. He had the leader of the Mongol embassy executed and the others humiliated, their beards shaved before being sent back to Genghis. In the political culture of the steppe, where honor was sacred, this was an unforgivable insult. It was a declaration of contempt, not only for Genghis Khan personally, but for the entire Mongol people. According to later accounts, when the surviving envoys returned, Genghis Khan withdrew to the mountains, removed his belt, and prayed to the eternal blue sky for vengeance. Whether literal or symbolic, the moment marked a turning point in world history. The Khan no longer sought trade. He sought annihilation. What followed was not a single campaign, but a total war unlike anything Eurasia had seen. Yet even as Mongol forces began to mobilize in 1219, Shah Muhammad Roman, too, remained blind to the danger. He believed his empire too vast, his cities too strong, his armies too numerous. He dismissed warnings from advisors who urged caution or negotiation. Instead of concentrating his forces, he scattered them across fortified cities, trusting walls and numbers to stop a nomadic army. This decision would doom Khwarezm. The Shah's confidence rested on old assumptions about warfare. For centuries, settled empires had viewed steppe nomads as raiders, dangerous but ultimately manageable. Walls, heavy cavalry, and large infantry formations had traditionally countered mounted archers, but Genghis Khan had transformed nomadic warfare into something entirely new. His armies combined speed with intelligence, terror with strategy. They gathered detailed reconnaissance, used psychological warfare, and coordinated movements across vast distances with precision. By the time Shah Muhammad realized the scale of the threat, it was already too late. Mongol forces crossed the Sadaria River in multiple columns, striking deep into Khwarezmian territory. Cities that had stood for generations fell in days or weeks. Garrisons were destroyed, populations massacred or enslaved, and resistance crushed with calculated brutality. Each fallen city sent waves of panic ahead of the Mongol advance. The Shah fled westward, abandoning his armies and subjects. He would die in exile on a small island in the Caspian Sea, a broken ruler haunted by defeat. His empire, once the envy of the Islamic world, would be erased so thoroughly that even its name would fade from common memory. Yet this destruction was not random savagery. It was the result of arrogance colliding with a new kind of imperial power. Khwarezm did not fall because it was weak, but because its leaders underestimated an enemy who understood unity, adaptability, and the psychology of war better than any ruler of his age. The humiliation of Genghis Khan at Otrar did not merely provoke a war. It unleashed a transformation. From the ashes of Khwarezm rose the largest contiguous land empire in history. Trade routes were reshaped, populations were displaced, the balance of power across Eurasia shifted permanently. In the autumn of 1219, the illusion of Khwarezmian invincibility shattered. As the leaves turned along the Sadaria River, Mongol horsemen appeared where no army was expected to stand. They did not come as a single mass, but as multiple, carefully coordinated forces moving along separate axes. This was the first shock to Shah Muhammad Roman II's defensive strategy. He had prepared for a frontal invasion. What he faced instead was a web tightening around his empire. Genghis Khan had divided his army with deliberate intent. One force under his sons Jochai and Chagatai moved north toward Otrar, the city where the insult had begun. Another, commanded by Ojdai, targeted the fortified towns along the river. Genghis himself led a central army through the Kizilkum Desert, a route considered impassable by Khwarezmian planners. By choosing speed and surprise over conventional logic, the Mongols bypassed defenses and struck at the heart of the empire. Otrar was the first major test. Governed still by Inalchuq, the man whose actions had sparked the war, the city was heavily fortified and well supplied. Its garrison numbered tens of thousands. Inalchuq believed he could hold out until relief arrived. Instead, he found himself isolated. The Mongols encircled the city and began a siege that combined patience with relentless pressure. They cut supply lines, used captured engineers to build siege equipment, and launched constant probing attacks to exhaust the defenders. After months of resistance, betrayal decided the city's fate. One of Otrar's commanders opened a gate to the Mongols, believing surrender preferable to annihilation. The city fell. Inalchuq was captured alive and brought before the Mongols. According to Persian and Mongol sources, he was executed brutally, molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a symbolic punishment for greed and treachery. Whether literal or embellished, the story spread quickly, reinforcing the message that those responsible for the original insult would not escape justice. With Otrar destroyed, panic rippled through Khwarezmian territory. Yet Shah Muhammad Roman, too, still failed to respond decisively. Instead of gathering his field armies to confront the Mongols, he retreated from city to city, issuing contradictory orders and mistrusting his own generals. His empire had numbers but no unity. Each city was left to fend for itself. The next target was Bukhara, one of the most revered cities of the Islamic world. Its mosques, madrasas, and markets symbolized centuries of scholarship and faith. The city's defenders believed its walls and spiritual prestige would protect it. They were wrong. Genghis Khan approached Bukhara with a force that had crossed the desert undetected, appearing suddenly before the city gates. The shock alone undermined morale. After brief resistance, the city fell. Genghis Khan entered Bukhara and addressed its inhabitants inside the main mosque. According to chroniclers, he declared that he was the punishment of God sent for their sins. Whether this speech occurred exactly as recorded, or was later shaped by writers, its psychological impact was immense. Bukhara was looted, its soldiers executed, and much of its population enslaved or killed. The city's libraries and religious institutions were not spared. The message was clear. Sacred status offered no protection. From Bukhara, the Mongols advanced on Samarkand, the jewel of the Khwarezmian Empire and its former capital. Samarkand was a metropolis, defended by massive walls, elite troops, and war elephants imported from India. Shah Muhammad had once believed it impregnable. Now he was nowhere to be found. The city stood alone. The siege of Samarkand revealed the full sophistication of Mongol warfare. They used Chinese engineers to construct siege towers and catapults. They employed psychological tactics, spreading rumors of Mongol invincibility and offering false promises of mercy. When segments of the garrison attempted a sortie, they were annihilated in open battle, their defeat visible from the city walls. After only a few days, Samarkand surrendered. Its defenders were separated from civilians. The soldiers were executed. Skilled artisans were spared and sent east to serve the Mongol Empire. The rest of the population was subjected to massacre and enslavement. Samarkand, once a center of culture and commerce, was reduced to ruins and ashes. Meanwhile, Shah Muhammad Roman, too, fled westward, pursued relentlessly by Mongol detachments. Genghis Khan had ordered his generals Jeeb and Subutai to hunt the Shah across the empire. What followed was one of the most extraordinary pursuits in military history. The Shah crossed mountains, rivers, and deserts, always just ahead of capture. Cities that sheltered him were punished. Governors who hesitated were destroyed. As the Shah fled, the empire unraveled behind him. Cities that might have resisted with coordinated support instead faced the Mongols alone. Some chose surrender, hoping for mercy. Others resisted and were annihilated. The Mongols adapted their response to each case, sometimes sparing populations, sometimes exterminating them, always reinforcing uncertainty and fear. One of the most tragic episodes unfolded at Urgench, the original heartland of the Khwarezmian dynasty. Located along the Amu-Darya River, Urgench was wealthy, populous, and fiercely defended. Unlike other cities, its terrain made siege operations difficult. The Mongols struggled to coordinate their attacks, and tensions arose among Genghis Khan's sons over command decisions. After prolonged fighting, Urgench fell. What followed was among the bloodiest massacres of the entire campaign. Chroniclers describe streets choked with corpses, rivers running red, and entire neighborhoods erased. While medieval numbers are often exaggerated, there is no doubt that the destruction was immense. Urgench ceased to exist as a major city. The fall of Urgench marked the effective end of organized Khwarezmian resistance. Shah Muhammad Roman, too, exhausted and ill, reached an island in the Caspian Sea. There, in 1220, he died alone, abandoned by allies and betrayed by his own arrogance. His death did not save his dynasty. His son, Jalal ad-Din Mingbanu, would attempt resistance, but the empire itself was gone. What made this collapse so extraordinary was its speed. In less than 2 years, a state that had dominated Central Asia vanished. Its cities lay in ruins. Its ruling elite was dead or scattered. Its population was decimated or displaced. Trade routes were broken, irrigation systems destroyed, and entire regions depopulated. Yet the Mongol campaign was not driven solely by vengeance. It was also a demonstration of a new imperial model. The Mongols rewarded submission and punished resistance with calculated severity. They integrated conquered peoples into their system, preserving skills and knowledge useful to the empire. The destruction of Khwarezm was both a warning and a foundation for further expansion. The humiliation of Genghis Khan had not merely triggered a war. It had exposed the fragility of arrogance in the face of adaptability and unity. Khwarezm's rulers believed walls, numbers, and wealth guaranteed survival. The Mongols proved that intelligence, speed, and psychological dominance mattered more. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire did not end with the fall of its cities or the death of its ruler. Instead, it marked the beginning of a profound transformation across Eurasia. The lands that had once formed a wealthy, centralized Islamic empire became a corridor of Mongol power, linking East Asia to the Middle East and Eastern Europe. What appeared at first as pure devastation soon reshaped trade, warfare, governance, and the balance of civilizations. In the immediate aftermath, Central Asia lay shattered. Cities that had taken centuries to build were depopulated in weeks. Irrigation systems that sustained agriculture along the Amu-Darya and Sudarya rivers were destroyed or abandoned. Fields turned to dust. Survivors fled into the countryside or toward distant lands. Persian chroniclers such as Juwayni and Rashid al-Din recorded the trauma with a mixture of grief and awe, struggling to comprehend how a world they had known could disappear so quickly. Yet from the Mongol perspective, the destruction of Khwarezm was a strategic necessity. Genghis Khan understood that partial victory invited rebellion. By eliminating Khwarezmian authority entirely, he removed a rival power and secured the western frontier of his growing empire. The Silk Road, once fragmented by competing states and tolls, now fell under a single imperial system. This would have consequences far beyond Central Asia. Trade, paradoxically, revived under Mongol rule. Once the initial violence subsided, the Mongols imposed order across their territories. Banditry was suppressed. Merchants were protected. Caravan routes reopened, now guarded by imperial authority. Goods, ideas, and people began moving across Eurasia at a scale unseen since the height of the Roman and Han empires. Chinese silk reached the Mediterranean more reliably. Persian scholars traveled east. European travelers would soon follow. The destruction of Khwarezm also reshaped Islamic political power. The empire had served as a major bulwark between the steppe and the heartlands of Islam. Its fall exposed Persia, Afghanistan, and eventually Mesopotamia to Mongol incursions. Within decades, Baghdad itself would fall, ending the Abbasid Caliphate and shattering another symbol of Islamic authority. The road to that catastrophe began at Otrar. One of the most significant outcomes of the Khwarezmian collapse was the rise of new Mongol leaders forged in its campaigns. Generals such as Subutai and Jebe demonstrated unprecedented operational reach, coordinating movements across thousands of kilometers. Their pursuit of Shah Muhammad Roman II did not end with his death. Instead, it evolved into reconnaissance in force, pushing westward into the Caucasus and Eastern Europe. These expeditions laid the groundwork for future invasions that would reach as far as Hungary and Poland. The campaign also transformed the Mongol state itself. Before Khwarezm, the Mongol Empire had largely been a steppe power focused on China and Inner Asia. After Khwarezm, it became a true world empire, ruling sedentary populations, cities, and agricultural regions. This required new administrative approaches. Mongols began employing Persian bureaucrats, Chinese engineers, and Muslim scholars. They adopted census systems, taxation policies, and legal codes that blended steppe tradition with imperial governance. Ironically, the very civilization Khwarezm had embodied helped administer the empire that destroyed it. Persian language and culture became central to Mongol administration in the West. Islamic scholars served at Mongol courts. Knowledge captured from conquered cities was preserved and repurposed. The Mongols did not aim to erase civilization, but to dominate it. Still, the human cost remained staggering. Entire lineages vanished. Urban life in Central Asia took generations to recover, if it recovered at all. Some cities never regained their former prominence. The demographic impact echoed for centuries, altering settlement patterns and ethnic compositions across the region. Archaeological evidence confirms layers of destruction corresponding to the Mongol invasions, underscoring the scale of the catastrophe described in written sources. The fall of Khwarezm also became a moral lesson in historical memory. Muslim chroniclers portrayed Shah Muhammad Roman II as a cautionary figure, a ruler undone by arrogance, distrust, and cruelty. His decision to insult a rising power, ignore diplomatic norms, and fragment his defenses was seen as a failure of leadership as much as a military defeat. Genghis Khan, by contrast, emerged in these accounts as an instrument of divine punishment, a reflection of medieval attempts to explain unprecedented disaster. From a broader historical perspective, the annihilation of Khwarezm marked the end of an era in which sedentary empires could reliably dismiss steppe powers as peripheral threats. The Mongols demonstrated that mobility, intelligence, and psychological warfare could overcome wealth and numbers. This lesson would influence military thinking long after the Mongol Empire itself fragmented. The shockwaves reached Europe as well. News of Mongol victories spread through merchant networks and diplomatic channels. Reports of entire cities destroyed and armies annihilated fueled fear and speculation. European chroniclers struggled to categorize the Mongols, often depicting them as apocalyptic forces. When Mongol armies later appeared on Europe's eastern borders, the memory of Khwarezm's fate amplified the terror. Despite this, the Mongol era also facilitated unprecedented cultural exchange. Technologies such as gunpowder weapons, printing techniques, and navigational knowledge spread westward. Medical and astronomical texts moved eastward. While Khwarezm itself vanished, the interconnected world that replaced it laid foundations for the early modern age. The tragedy of Khwarezm lies not only in its destruction, but in the lost potential of what it represented. It was a center of learning, trade, and administration, capable of shaping history differently had its leaders chosen diplomacy over contempt. Instead, a single act of arrogance at Otrar triggered a chain reaction that no wall or army could stop. By humiliating Genghis Khan, the Khwarezmian elite believed they were asserting dominance. In reality, they exposed their vulnerability. The Mongols did not merely defeat them, they erased their political existence and absorbed their world into something far larger and more enduring. When the dust finally settled over Central Asia, the Khwarezmian Empire existed only in memory. No revival followed. No restoration came. Unlike Rome, which fell and rose again in fragments, or Persia, which reinvented itself under new dynasties, Khwarezm vanished as a political entity forever. Its disappearance was so complete that later generations often struggled to grasp that such a powerful state had once dominated the heart of Eurasia. This final outcome is what makes its story so extraordinary and so important to world history. The destruction of Khwarezm was not simply another conquest. It was a turning point that revealed how the medieval world was changing. Wealth, population, and fortified cities were no longer guarantees of survival. Adaptability, intelligence, and leadership mattered more than inherited prestige. The Khwarezmian ruling elite had relied on old assumptions, believing that tradition and size would shield them from a threat they barely understood. Genghis Khan represented a new reality, one that punished stagnation and arrogance with unforgiving speed. At the center of this tragedy stands Shah Muhammad Roman II. His personal failings mirrored the structural weaknesses of his empire. He ruled through fear rather than loyalty, distrusted capable generals, and allowed court intrigue to undermine coherent decision-making. When faced with crisis, he chose flight over leadership. His refusal to confront the Mongols directly or to concentrate his forces turned a difficult war into a catastrophic collapse. History remembers him not as a great conqueror, but as a ruler who ran while his world burned. His son, Jalal ad-Din Mingbanu, attempted to resist the Mongols and restore honor to the dynasty. He fought with courage and tactical skill, even winning a rare victory against Mongol forces at the Battle of Parwan in 1221. But bravery could not resurrect an empire that no longer existed. Without cities, resources, or unified support, his resistance became a series of desperate struggles. He would eventually be killed years later, hunted down by enemies in a world reshaped by Mongol dominance. For Genghis Khan, the destruction of Khwarezm solidified his transformation from steppe warlord to world conqueror. The campaign validated his methods and expanded his vision. He had faced one of the richest and most powerful states of the Islamic world and obliterated it. This success emboldened further expansion, laying the groundwork for Mongol campaigns into the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and beyond. The Mongol Empire would soon stretch from the Pacific Ocean to the edges of the Mediterranean. Yet Genghis Khan did not live to see the full extent of this transformation. He died in 1227, less than a decade after the fall of Khwarezm. By then, however, the course of history had been irreversibly altered. His successors inherited an empire built not only on conquest, but on the lessons learned from Khwarezm. They understood the value of administration, tolerance of religions, and the integration of conquered elites. These policies allowed Mongol rule to endure far longer than most empires founded through violence. The lands of former Khwarezm became part of this new imperial order. Over time, cities were rebuilt, populations returned, and trade resumed. But the cultural and political center had shifted. Power now flowed through Mongol capitals and along routes secured by Mongol authority. The memory of Khwarezm lived on in chronicles, poetry, and warnings passed from ruler to ruler about the dangers of pride and miscalculation. From a global perspective, the fall of Khwarezm accelerated the creation of a connected Eurasian world. Under Mongol rule, merchants, diplomats, missionaries, and scholars traveled farther and faster than ever before. The exchange of ideas and technologies reshaped societies on multiple continents. While the destruction that enabled this connectivity was horrific, its consequences shaped the trajectory of the medieval and early modern periods. Historians continue to debate the scale of Mongol brutality and the accuracy of medieval casualty figures. What is beyond dispute, however, is the psychological impact of the Khwarezmian campaign. It shattered the confidence of established powers and demonstrated that no empire was beyond reach. This lesson resonated from China to Europe, influencing how states viewed security, diplomacy, and warfare. Khwarezm's fate also serves as a reminder of how individual decisions can trigger systemic collapse. The execution of merchants at Otrar was not, by itself, an act that should have destroyed an empire. It became catastrophic because it reflected a deeper culture of arrogance and misjudgment at the highest levels of power. When diplomacy failed, leadership failed with it. In the end, the arrogant empire that humiliated Genghis Khan did not fall because it was poor or weak. It fell because it misunderstood the world it was living in. The Mongols were not an anomaly to be dismissed, but a force born from changing conditions, capable of adapting faster than any settled state of its time. Khwarezm looked backward when it needed to look forward. That is why its story still matters. It is not merely a tale of conquest, but a warning repeated throughout history. Empires that cling to old certainties, that underestimate new powers, and that allow pride to override judgment often meet the same fate. Khwarezm's cities may lie in ruins, its rulers forgotten, but the lesson of its destruction remains alive. The humiliation of Genghis Khan was meant to assert dominance. Instead, it unleashed a storm that swept an empire from the map and reshaped the world. Few moments illustrate more clearly how arrogance can turn strength into vulnerability, and how quickly history can change when a rising force is ignored